Minutes 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Coach on Fire Radio.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of your Journey to Success podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Weiss. I'm a life coach, speaker, author based here in Phoenix. And yeah, the goal here every week, Paul, I see your comment. The goal here every week is to create a movement of people who are passionate about learning and growing and wanting real answers. They want to know more than the superficial buzzwords that are so prevalent in this industry. They want to go deeper. They want to live in their greatness. And this week's topic came from actually a Facebook follower. They sent me a private message, and their question was almost verbatim: should I stay or should I go? What do I do because my partner is addicted? So before we get into all that, Paul, it's nice to see you. Yeah, we should be playing the old Clash song, shouldn't we? But for those of you tuning in, if you have questions or comments, you can call me on Skype, and it's really simple. You don't show up on the screen here on Facebook or anything like that. Even if you choose video call, you won't show up. So just give me a call. And even if it's not the topic we're talking about, if there's something going on in your life that's you're struggling with, just look for Kenny Weiss on Skype and give me a call. And I'm happy to talk to you about any topic you want through Skype, whatever works for you. So let's get to the topic. Should I stay or should I go? If you are living with a partner who's addicted, well, first of all, that's a tough life. I've been the partner who's been addicted. I grew up with a mother who's addicted. I've lived with addicted partners. So bottom line, it's a nightmare. And I don't wish it upon anyone. But the fact is, addiction is massively prevalent in our society. Just look at food. Almost, most of the population is overweight. That's an addiction. I mean, one thing you have to realize about addiction is every choice we ever make, if you like purple, if you like Brussels sprouts, if you like to wear sandals, I don't care what it is, every choice you ever make is an addiction. When you think about what you wear, what you're going to do, there's a chemical reaction that happens in your body, and it gets on a loop. And so that becomes the things you like. Hey, Shirley, good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. But so recognize that, first of all. If you play a certain sport, have an activity, you like to go to plays or movies, all of those things are addictions. So every choice you make is an addiction. Now, the problem is going to the movies isn't a problem unless, it doesn't hurt your lifestyle or your life, unless that's all you do is go to a movie and, don't eat or drink or sleep or anything else. But in our society, we primarily see addictions as alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, things like that. So those are our normal thoughts of addiction. What a lot of people don't, really, it's getting more so, but food is usually everyone's first addiction. That's why the country's massively overweight as a society, because we're trying to soothe feelings, and food's really the first way to do it. And it's the first thing we learn. The other thing you have to realize is most people that are addicted have multiple addictions. And it's not just one. That's one of the mistakes in recovery couples make is, they come to me because their husband or wife is addicted to alcohol or prescription pills or porn or affairs, whatever it may be. Work's an addiction also. And they think once they deal with that, everything's gone. Well, the first addiction that addicts give up is the easiest, but it's not their core addiction. What you're going to find is, like with me, I gave up. Alcohol is a piece of cake for me to give up. It's not my core addiction. My core addiction is sugar. I've suffered from alcohol, sex, love, spending, tobacco, and sugar. And so sugar is what started it all off for me as a kid. We'd go to the store, and whether I saved up money to buy licorice mix or I stole it, because I would steal it as a kid, sugar was always the way I was medicating my childhood away. So if you're big into sweets, probably your core addiction too, just like me. Now, it's not that you have to give up sweets. I mean, I still eat lots of sweets, but I'm moderate about it. And I also pay attention when I am eating sugar, what's going on emotionally? What am I feeling? Am I trying to avoid something or not? I see a bunch of more people have tuned in, so I want to let you know as I get more into this topic of should I stay or should I go, for those of you who are in a relationship with an addict, if you want to call me on Skype, or even if it's a different topic, if there's something going on in your life or you hear a certain aspect of something I talk about and you want to talk about that, just call me on Skype. It's really simple. Just look for my name, Kenny Weiss. Whether you choose audio or video call, it doesn't matter. Video, you're not going to show up. You'll be if you want to be anonymous, that's fine. Create a false Skype name, but your face will not show up here on Facebook. Just your voice, everyone will hear that. So, but any of you listening, struggling with addiction or have a partner who has an addict or want to talk about any other topic, call me on Skype. I'm happy to help you any way I can. So, all right, let's get into this. Should I stay or should I go? If I'm with a partner who's addicted, and I want to start with the stay part. I have certain guidelines when I'm working with clients and they come in with this question. And the first thing I say is, has the addict admitted they have an addiction? And Laura asked a question. Every choice you make is an addiction? Sorry, I see she's typed this in on Facebook. Yes, Laura. The way our brain and body works is, I see it looks like you have a red or maybe an orange shirt, a Broncos shirt. That's an addiction. You see, every choice we ever make creates in our brain and our body what's called a neural pathway. All right. When you fire an emotion, there's a chemical reaction in your body. And whether it's pleasurable or even if it's not pleasurable, if that neural pathway gets fired enough, it becomes an addiction. So if I'm reading that right, you're a Broncos fan. That's an addiction. It's the feeling you get when you put that Broncos shirt on. Your brain and body craves that feeling. So it does it. If you yell at yourself, talk down to yourself, that's the exact same thing. That's an emotional chemical addiction. What most people don't realize is everything we do in life is emotion-based, not thought-based. That's the big misnomer is I'll change my thoughts. For the most part, it's a waste of time. You have to change the way you feel. So Laura, whatever you're doing in your life, good, bad, or indifferent, it's just addictions inside your body. And so the key is to learn what's going on emotionally, whether you do something you like or dislike. What are you feeling that makes you do this or not want to do it? And you'll start to understand what's causing all of your behaviors, all of the problems and successes in your life. They're just emotional addictions running through you, okay? So that's the premise. Now, getting back to whether you should stay or go in a relationship, that, as I was saying, the big piece is has your partner admitted that they have an addiction? If your partner has admitted they have an addiction, you have a chance. The next thing is, are they working a program? Now, I don't mean just saying they're going to AA or some 12-step group. Are they working a program? I'll get into more detail in that later. Are they progressing? I'm not talking perfection. Slips for some people It's not a requirement, but some people slip in their recovery. It's progress, not perfection. I know I had a lot of slips in all of my recoveries, but they taught me a lot about the process. So I'm not saying you have to have one. I'm not saying it's a prerequisite or that it's okay. I'm not condoning it in any way, but everybody works their process differently. So the question is, if they have a slip, what do they do after it? Now, if you've seen a pattern, that's something that we get into a little gray area there. If there's a pattern to the slips, because that might be a backdoor way of staying addicted and controlling you. Now, the other thing is you need to look at yourself as to whether you stay or go. You want to set a limit, a certain point or a certain action, behavior, whatever. And if they cross that, then you leave. And it's best if the addicted partner isn't even aware of that limit. You just set that in yourself. Like, for instance, my ex-wife, we were dating. She didn't even know this, but I noticed she was a pretty big drinker. Well, because of my, issues around alcohol, I don't mind someone who drinks, has a couple drinks here and there, but she was kind of drinking every time we'd go out, and more than just a couple drinks. Well, I don't want to be around somebody who has to get tipsy just to be in my presence, or has to get tipsy every time they go out. That tells me they don't know how to be present in life. I don't want that in my life. I want someone who's able to connect. So that doesn't work for me. Now, I didn't say a word to her. I just kept an eye on it. It was early in the relationship. Maybe she's nervous. And so I didn't make a snap judgment, but I know I'd set in my mind, it was like 2 weeks down the road, that by that Wednesday, if I don't see a change in the drinking, I'm done. Well, I think it was a Monday night before that Wednesday, we went out to dinner, and she turned to me in the middle of dinner. She said, I've been thinking about something. I'm thinking I drink too much. And if I'm going to be around you, I just can't do that. So I'm going to limit myself to 3 drinks just a couple times a month. Okay. That worked. I didn't ask her. That's the key. I didn't ask her. She made the choice on her own. So the point is, set a limit inside your head of what you can tolerate and make sure you're willing to act on it, because that's loving for you and them. I'm going to pause before I get into more of this, because Marcy Lynn has a question, or she made a comment here on Facebook. She said, my ex-fiance, we're both in a 12-step program, and he decided he wanted to drink and then do drugs. I made the choice to not be with him because recovery was more important to me. You can't fight against someone else's addiction. You can only help yourself. Amen. There's a perfect example of setting a limit. She decided, I'm not okay with this, and I don't want to date somebody or be married to somebody who's actively in their addiction. Didn't work for her, so she left. That's the perfect way of handling it. Okay? Now, remember, for those of you listening, if you want to call me in on Skype, if you want to talk about that, Marcy Lynn, and share your story around that, please do. Just look me up on Skype, Kenny Weiss. It's really simple. Just give me a shout. You don't show up here in the video portion at all. If you don't want to talk about this, we can talk about any other topic you like. So don't be afraid to call if there's something you want to chat about. All right, now let's move on to whether you should go. If you're in an abuse or a addicted relationship. One of the things I'll tell my clients is, if there's abuse, physical, verbal, sexual abuse in any way, that's a hard line. No, I'm out. At least a trial separation. But there needs to be distance, and that cannot be tolerated. That's a firm no, I will not put up with this. And so if you're staying in that, if you are with an addicted partner and they are being physically, verbally, or sexually abusive, and you are choosing to stay, this is going to be news to you, but then you are choosing the abuse. They're not responsible for it. Okay? If this is happening to you right now, then you have just chosen to continue the abuse. And you can't blame them for it, because your staying is an implied yes. So there are plenty of shelters you can go to, plenty of help you can reach out to. So if you choose to stay, that's on you, and that's your responsibility. It's not something, a lot of men and women stay and play the victim and go, oh, they're abusing, they're addicts and they're abusing me. Isn't this awful? Because they get so much attention from their friends and family. And so it's a victim power game. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But if someone's being abusive to you, that's a reason to leave. Another reason to leave is if you can't stop enabling them. Yeah, if you can't stop enabling them, that's a huge sign. If you feel like you have to constantly rescue or be there or clean up their issues, that's now we're talking about your addiction, your codependency, and I'll get into that more later. But then you both definitely need to leave each other or separate at the very least, because now you're in a co-addicted relationship and you're both harming each other. So the other reason to leave a relationship that's addicted is if they are in complete denial and refuse to even consider that they have an addiction. Staying and arguing with them is completely useless. They need consequences, and your staying isn't a consequence. Okay, so make sure if that's going on, if you're in a relationship where they don't see it, they're in complete denial, then you need to at least separate at the very least. Another reason to end the relationship would be are you being abusive back? Whether that's verbally, physically, sexually, whatever. If there's mutual abuse going on, maybe when they get, they're in their addiction, they're acting out, and you freak out and you get abusive, there is never, ever any excuse to hit somebody or to be abusive. And I know I was abused by my first wife. Now, I was the victim enabler. I stayed. After she hit me the first time, I didn't leave. Every hit after that was my fault. That's part of the problem I have with the Me Too generation, is the lack of responsibility that they don't take. When I chose that abuse, I set it up. I also was very condescending at times. It doesn't excuse or give her permission to hit me. She's still responsible for that. But I had to deal with my denial and my part that I played in the abuse itself. And that's, you see that, I see that with a lot of the Bill Cosby women. They say they're over it, and yet they're filled with venom and that he needs to spend his life in jail. They haven't forgiven themselves for, there are a couple women who went back several times, and they're still angry and hurt at themselves for being re-victimized by him, and they're projecting it onto him. Now, I'm not condoning what he did, but until they reconcile, wow, I played a part in this, they're going to be filled with self-hatred, and then they project it outwards. That was something I had to realize, is even though I thought I'd forgiven my wife, I was filled with self-hatred because I hadn't owned that I had played a huge part in setting up the dynamic of my own abuse, and everybody does. And that's when you get real freedom, is when you get that. And yes, Lisa, verbal abuse, I know for me, it was my marriage was heavily verbally abusive. She'd yell for 2 or 3 hours, but I stood in front of it. I never told her to stop. I never left. Now, I didn't have the tools I have now, so I don't blame myself. But my staying gave her permission. Okay. So I want to give some solutions to those of you who might be in a relationship. And if you are, if these signs are going on, well, let me place a caveat. If there's abuse, if they're in denial, if you're abusing back, if you're enabling the behavior, and you've known about those things, like known those are reasons to leave, and you haven't left, and this is the first time you're ever hearing that, then I would not call you co-addicted. I would call you somebody stepping into enlightenment for the first time. Just like when I went into counseling after my first marriage and realized it took me a while to admit that I was abused. I didn't see it that way. And that may be you. You may not be ready to face that you're in an abusive relationship. So you may not be ready to accept your co-addiction. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a process. It took me a while to accept my co-addiction as well. So, but if you have been in one of these, maybe you're not in one now, but you have been in one. Oh, sorry. I see another comment here from Karen about anabolic steroids. Yes, steroids are an addiction. If somebody's been using steroids, they're addicted. And they have really poor self-esteem. And if they don't think they have a problem, the same rules apply. And usually, see, there's a big misnomer. People think if you take steroids, it makes you aggressive. It doesn't. It only increases whatever level of aggression you already had in you. Aggression, they've done studies on this. You are before you take steroids, you have already determined as a person how aggressive you are. All right. It can be here, it can be here. Everyone varies. All right. So whether you're at very low levels of aggression before steroids or very high levels, as soon as you take steroids, it accelerates both of them. Okay. So steroids themselves don't make you aggressive. They accelerate your aggressive tendencies. Okay. So I want to make sure that's clear. But Karen, yes, if this person is in complete denial that they have an addiction to steroids, if they're abusive in any way, if you become abusive back to them, if you're enabling the behavior at all, like you mentioned, he's isolating and disappearing. If you feel like you have to chase him down and fix him and rescue him and help him in his isolation and get him out of it, then you need to leave the relationship and get into codependency recovery, because it's not your job. And that's part of why he does it, because probably for years it's worked. People chase him. And so that's his MO. And so that would probably be why he picked you, because you would have codependency tendencies. And so when he drops off the face of the earth, he knows that he can control you and get you to chase him. So you're not loving him or yourself if you do that. Now, I don't know if that's true. Those are all assumptions, but I'm just walking down the rabbit trail in case that's happening, so you have an answer as to how to handle it. Okay. Lisa brings up, after leaving, the boundaries set. It's all good, except now the abuser is angry because there's no contact. Narcissistic sociopaths are very sad people. Yeah, and we have to be careful. I mean, borderline personality, narcissism, sociopathy, everyone likes to throw those terms around now. When somebody gets angry or selfish or, has hard times. And those are I would recommend, before throwing those terms around, and I'm not saying you're doing this, Lisa, I'm talking about the general audience, because maybe you are fully aware, but just in case you're not, and just in case people are listening aren't fully aware, narcissism, sociopathy, borderline, those, everybody has levels of those in them. It's natural. We all have levels of borderline narcissism and sociopathy. Well, let me get rid of the sociopathy, because a key ingredient to sociopathy, people throw that word around, but bad behavior doesn't make you a sociopath. Criminal behavior, one of the key distinctions to sociopathy is there must be some sort of criminal behavior. Now, one of the things people don't realize is something like escorting, okay? There are high levels of sociopathy in escorting. They can sit there and go, well, morally, to me, it's not a big deal, or in Nevada, it's legal, but it's still breaking the law, okay? So that would be somebody, doesn't mean just because you're an escort, you're a sociopath, but sociopaths will find clever ways to walk that line of legality to hide their sociopathy. And then there's the full-blown who break the law and are in jail. But just giving you a key distinction with sociopathy. But when it comes to borderline and narcissism, we all have levels of those, okay? So, Karen says 10 days without any speaking to him or seeing him, no contact at all. Good for you, Karen. That's awesome and very loving for both of you. Great job. You should be really proud of yourself for that. That's great. All right, so solutions, Karen. You get to decide if this applies for you, if you feel there was any kind of co-addiction before this point. First part, self-care. Self-care is huge. Go love yourself. And that means, what can you do for yourself that doesn't require anybody else to meet your need or want? So, like for me, I go for walks. I lay in the sun. I play tennis. Like today, I went shopping. Not that I bought anything. I just walked around the mall. I love to walk around the mall and look at, I made a Facebook post about these shoes I saw. They're total pimp shoes that when I was drinking, I totally would have worn 30 years ago. But I'm sober now and I don't wear fur coats and fedora pimp hats. So they're not really appropriate for a guy my age. But I just thought it was kind of funny. So, but I love to look at stuff like that. That's total self-care for me, all right? It fills my tank and it doesn't require anybody else to do that. You can use prayer, you can use all these different things, okay? But really, really start focusing on you, because part of a co-addicted relationship is your whole life is about trying to keep them sober. Find out where they are, what they're doing. Are they lying, telling the truth? You're so hyper-focused on everything in their life, you have no clue what's going on in yours. Get into your life. Become an expert in your life. That's the first and the most important step to recovery from a co-addicted relationship, okay? The next thing is you do need support, because the withdrawal from that codependency can be incredibly isolating. Physically, it will hurt you. You'll have physical withdrawal symptoms. People don't realize this, but most of the pain after a relationship ends is just the codependency they're feeling. They're going through withdrawals from codependency because every relationship out there that we've been taught is codependent in nature. And so most people's pain after a relationship is the loss of the codependent dynamic. And so they're feeling that physically. That's the emotional addiction that they were in while in the relationship. So you need a support group. There are tons. Codependence Anonymous, Al-Anon. There are groups for every addiction and everything. Church groups, divorce groups, whatever. Get yourself in a support group with like-minded people who can remind you when you're being codependent and hold you accountable, and also love you and hug you when you need it and let you cry on their shoulder, okay? Yeah, like Karen here. Karen goes and hikes 5 times a week. That's total self-care and self-love. That's great stuff, Karen. Good job. The other thing I advise my clients who are co-addicted is go become an expert in codependency. The single best book out there to learn about codependency is Pia Mellody. It's P-I-A-M-E-L-L-O-D-Y, Pia Mellody, Facing Codependence, okay? That should be standard reading for everybody listening. I don't give a hoot if you're with an addict or not, if you're in any relationship or you want to be in a relationship, even to deal with your parents and your kids, you must read that book. That book will change your life. It's amazing what you learn about yourself. So I really recommend that. The other thing is go become an expert in addiction. Learn how it works, because so many times as a co-addict, you feel powerless and helpless and tons of fear. And remember, fear, I've talked about this many times. There are only 3 fears: fear of rejection, inadequacy, powerlessness. When you're with an addict, tons of inadequacy. You don't have the skills, tools, or knowledge to deal with this. That's why you need to become an expert in codependency and an expert in addiction. It'll help you with that fear. Also, tremendous powerlessness. By going to become an expert, you empower yourself. Okay? Instead of giving your power away and letting your whole life be determined by this addict, by going to become an expert in these areas, you have now empowered yourself. You're stepping away from the codependency. You're stepping into what is something that's healthy, which is called intra-dependency, where you have two separate people and they periodically join together. Okay? Right now, your whole life is centered around the addict. You need to get out of that and into intra-dependence. Another key for you is don't accept any blame for their choices, for the addicts. Addicts are wonderful at gaslighting. They're wonderful at turning everything back onto you. Laura says she doesn't see how how steroids are an addiction. And she has a clinical background, she says. Well, Laura, I'd think about this aspect of steroids or any other thing we do. Why are they using steroids? To become a bodybuilder. It's a huge self-esteem issue there, lacking in self-esteem, a sense of powerlessness and inadequacy. It's not, and massive shame. And as I talk about with shame, I'm not sure if you've read my book, Laura, but with shame, something I haven't seen other people talk about is we adopt a false persona. That's part of the shame component. And so somebody who's using steroids, they're building up a false persona. They're not even present in themselves. All right. So somebody, if I remember right from what Karen said, 8 years of steroids, that's massive abuse. And steroids are illegal as well. So we have somebody who's doing something that's illegal, that destroys the body, that also keeps them from being present in their life, which and participating in their life, which is part of, it's not I wouldn't call it a DSM-4, clinical definition, but I guess from myself and what I would call an addiction, to me, addiction for me, this isn't a DSM version. Addiction for me is tremendous feelings that are being avoided from previous trauma. And it's an attempt, a coping skill to avoid those tremendous, overwhelming feelings, so that we don't have to face them or deal with them. That's how I see addiction. So clinically, that doesn't fall under it. But the steroid use, the way she described it, sounds like pure addiction. It's overuse, it's abusive. So, and it's detrimental to his lifestyle and his health. So, okay, where was I? Becoming an expert, and don't accept blame for your addict's choices. Okay. They are very good at, like I said, projecting and going, well, if you, like I did this one. I did this one with my wife who was abusive. Well, if you'd have sex with me. It's not true, So we only had 12 instances of intimacy. And an instance of intimacy would be physical touch, kind words, or any sort of sexual activity in 10 years. 12 instances in 10 years. So I used to blame her for it, but as I see now, I got out of denial. I saw how this works. And if you're in a relationship like this, you're in one because you picked it, as I saw. We picked these people and their problems, the things we hate about them. You have to recognize you picked them because it's an issue inside of you. I didn't know how to be sexual. Now, I bet I'd gotten sober from drinking. I was highly promiscuous when I drank. I didn't know how to have sex sober. I didn't want to. It scared the hell out of me. So I picked somebody who subconsciously, I never knew she wouldn't be sexual, but I know how the brain works. We'll be attracted to somebody like that. And that's why I picked her. She wasn't capable of it. And then I could play the victim and blame her. And that's why we do it. So, Laura is saying they are an addiction. Yes. Oh, okay. What you typed here said, I can't see how steroids. Oh, I misread it. I can't see how steroids are okay. I thought you meant, I just misread it. Okay, thanks for the clarification, Laura. Appreciate that. Now, one of the biggest pieces, if you're in a co-addicted relationship or with an addict, is you have to get out of denial. You have to get it out of denial. One, that you're with an addict. Two, that you're co-addicted yourself. Three, that the relationship is toxic for both of you and that the addiction is a problem. Denial is the biggest thing that keeps things, I've been with partners who were prescription drug addicts, and I used to drive around town picking up their pills. I was in denial. I was afraid, but I enabled their addiction. I was as big a part of it. And a lot of co-addicts do this. Maybe they don't go pick up their booze and drugs, but they bail them out of jail. They cover for them at work. They take phone calls. They do a lot of covering for addicts because we get a lot of power by being the rescuer. Aren't we sweet and loving? And we're not. We're being incredibly abusive to ourselves and to them. So here's the biggest part of denial. This is the toughest part. You have to realize that you're a part of the problem. And the spouse who's not addicted, this is a tough pill to swallow. But you were attracted to them. These addictive qualities were always there. Whether you admitted it to yourself, and even if they didn't even show it, like I was with a partner who didn't do anything, and then all of a sudden we got together and those addictions came out, which is very common. There's really a chemical reaction that happens when you marry and stuff. And so it really just sparks all the childhood stuff, trauma. And so you'll see a lot of those types of things just show up out of nowhere. So, but the thing is our brains are wired to seek our previous trauma, something called repetition compulsion. And so we will choose partners. And so if you picked an addict, you wanted it. And you have to learn to face that. You have to look at your own childhood, your own past, and see, how is this person reminding me of the childhood I went through? Was there abandonment? Was there criticism? Was there domination? What was it? What's their behavior mirroring the exact sense of pain and anguish I felt as a child? Because that's why you picked them. You're trying to teach yourself. You're trying to overcome it. But most people don't realize it. So that's incredibly important, is that you learn you're as big a part of the problem as they are. And it's imperative that you go work on your own childhood issues. Okay. Another thing for the co-addicted solutions is, let's say they're working a program. Okay. What I tell all my clients is ignore their words. Don't listen to a single word an addict says. Watch their actions. Actions are everything. Are they coming home from work, grabbing their workbook, sitting down, working the program, making phone calls, going to meetings? What are their actions? When they make a mistake, maybe they, a lot of rage is coming up and they start to blow up, but they pause and they work on it. They're not perfect, but they're getting better. Watch their actions. That's incredibly important. Another key thing for the co-addict is when your addict is acting out, don't ever have a discussion about the addiction while they're intoxicated in whatever form that is. Food, drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, working, whatever it is. Don't ever get to them, especially mind-altering scenarios, alcohol and drugs, things like that. That is not the time and place. That's abusive on your part because it's a power dynamic, because you can think more clearly. So you're trying to release your venom on them. And that's something you have to look at as well. Okay. Now, another big part with all of this is to learn to use boundaries. And anyone, I keep forgetting, anyone listening, Laura, if you want to call in on Skype and talk more about your experience, sounds like you have a lot. You said, you're saying dangerous clinically to use steroids. But if you want to call in, Laura, and talk about any of this stuff on Skype, by all means, please do. Or maybe there's another topic that matters to you, something going on in your life. But give me a call if you'd like to chat. Anyone else that's watching as well. So now I want to talk about the concepts of boundaries that are critically important. And most people don't understand boundaries. Most people use boundaries as threats. If you don't stop doing this, I'm leaving. That's not a boundary. That's a threat. All right? Boundaries are not about controlling the other person. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. Boundaries are not about getting the other person to do something you want. Ever. Boundaries are about loving and protecting yourself. That's it. They're about me. They're to protect me, really, from myself. That's what boundaries are. So I've told this story on other shows of my second wife and how back then I had huge issues with people being late. I still do sometimes have issues with it. So I set the boundary. I was protecting myself from myself. I said, look, if we make plans and I say 7 o'clock, I'm either going to be there or leave at 7. I have to, because I'll go. I was going to swear. I don't want to swear. I was going to say bat, S-H-I-T, crazy. If I was late or people were late. So I set the boundary to protect me from me, because my issue with being late came from my parents. They were always late. Well, that's not her fault. So I said, this is what I have to do to protect myself when it's late. I have to leave on time. See, I was protecting me from my own anger feelings, my own frustration, all of that. That's why I set the boundary. The boundary was to protect me from my own venom, okay? So if you are with a partner who's an addict, and here's a boundary that could be effective. I've done this in my marriages. Like, there were times my wife acted in a way that didn't work for me, and it worked for her. She was perfectly okay with it. And so I said, I see that you're walking in who you are, and I appreciate that. I love it, but I'm whacked out about it right now. I can't handle it. So I need to set a boundary. As long as you're operating in that behavior, I'm going to stay in a hotel. I need to do it to protect me from myself. I didn't ask her to change. I didn't tell her to stop the behavior. What I did is I realized I'm the problem. I can't fix me in this moment, being around her choices. That's not her problem. I picked her. I picked her because she had those traits in her. So it's up to me to go protect myself. And that's why I would stay in a hotel. She did the exact same thing at times too, because let's face it, living with me ain't no piece of cake. Because of my childhood, I suffer from, both sides of the dynamic. A relationship with me can be incredibly chaotic. So, she probably should have lived in a hotel full time. So anyway, I'm getting better though. Again, the key with boundaries is it's to help you with your own codependency problems and your own lack of self-esteem. Because if we're wanting to control somebody, that's about us. If we're wanting them to be different, that's a lack of self-esteem in us. It's up to us to go fix that, not them. And so what we're ended up doing when we give these threats, especially threats, those of you, whether you're in an addicted or co-addicted relationship or just a regular one, and you're spewing your anger and threats onto your partner, you're projecting your own lack of self-control onto the person. I don't care what somebody does. When we yell and scream, that's our issue. It's not theirs. And we're projecting our own insecurities. Because remember, well, I haven't, maybe next week I need to do denial, because we've never talked about how denial works. But whenever, I'll just real quick, and I don't have time to get into it, but whenever we are judging, blaming, and criticizing somebody, and I don't care what it is, we're not talking about them, we're talking about us, always. And maybe that's what I need to do next week is make the topic denial and show how that works. You'll be fascinated to discover, oh my God, I'm the problem, not them. So anyway, another thing you can do, we did this when I ran sex addiction groups years ago. All of the people who had the affairs or whoever, whether it was porn, however they were acting out, they were required to take polygraphs. In the beginning, for people who just came into the group, they took one every week for a month. If they passed those every week, then they'd take one once a month. When they did that for 6 months, then they'd go to once every 6 months. When they pass that, once a year. So that's always an option. If you're with somebody, requiring them to take polygraphs for based on their sobriety. And that way, that can help heal the trust. Now, here's the other thing you have to realize, because I saw this a lot. The addicted person would be taking the polygraphs, passing everything. And the spouse or partner would still a year, 2 years later, be reliving, couldn't forgive. It's like they hadn't moved at all, even though their partner had made these massive changes in their life, gone to groups, individual counseling, passed polygraphs, completely turned their life around, and the partner couldn't move. They were still stuck in all the betrayal. Well, that's when the counseling and everything shifts to the co-addicted. And this is why I say, if you're in a relationship with an addict, you're co-addicted, because this is really prevalent. Almost all people who are with somebody who's an addict are addicts themselves, and primarily they are co-addicted codependents, but they are also caught in the shame piece that I talk about in my book. They are professional victims. And so they can't give up their victimhood. They have to hold on to it. It's their identity. It's a false persona they had to take on because of the childhood trauma they went through. And so they hold on to that shame persona of, I'm the victim and you're the problem, and there's nothing wrong with me. Now, there can be borderline tendencies and other things involved, but primarily that's what's going on. So that's another option to you if you're in an addicted relationship, is polygraphs, to at least repair the bit, gets a sense of trust and understanding going again. So you can think about that. The other thing that is imperative as I start to wrap up here is stop all rescuing and enabling behavior. Please let the addict suffer the consequences on their own. It breaks my heart when I see people who are big proponents of helping people with addicts, and they're like, yeah, but you got to love them. Yeah, but rescuing an addict when they're still acting out is not love. It's not. See, that's the co-addiction of, I need to love them into sobriety. Listen to those words. It's so important that I love them. It's my calling in life is to love them and help them get sober. Who's that about? I have to help them. I have to love them. That's about them. It has nothing to do with the addict. It's their codependent need to feel like a hero and a rescuer. That person is just as damaging as the person who's doing the drugs or drinking or whatever it is. So any type of rescuing and enabling does not help them ever. They must suffer the consequences of their choices. And sometimes that means they go too far and we might lose them. That is not your fault, ever, ever, ever. I don't care what an addict says or what the situation is. If an addict takes their life, whether from overdose or any other reason, there is nothing you could have done, should have done, would have done, had to do. It had absolutely nothing to do with you. Literally nothing. They made that choice on their own. You are not to blame. Okay? Now, the only time there can be a level of shared responsibility is if you know this. Now that you've heard this message and you choose to not get into codependency recovery and you choose to continue to rescue and enable, that's your own addiction. And so your addiction may further their addiction. And so you may be co-responsible for some of that. Okay. I want to bring up one last thing because people wouldn't believe this, but it happens all the time. A lot of times when addicts get sober, the spouse or partner tries to talk them back into being an addict. It's true. I have this happen all the time with clients. The husband or wife gets 30, 60, 90 days of sobriety. And all of a sudden they come in and they go, my spouse the other day was saying, look, you're doing great. What's the big deal? Smoke a joint, have a beer. It's not that big a deal. You're doing great. You know why that is? Because they need them to be the addict. And this is why it's a co-addicted relationship. Because now that the addict is getting clean, they don't need the spouse. They can live life on their own. That's why the spouse picked this addictive partner, because they wanted the power. They wanted to be Superman or Superwoman and rescue them and play the victim over the addiction. And now that it's gone and their spouse is living this wonderful life without them, they feel bankrupt inside. See, they were always feeling bankrupt inside. That's why they picked the addict. But see, it keeps the focus on the addict. The addict runs the household, monopolizes everyone's time and attention, right? And that allows the co-addicted partner to never have to look at their own pain. It's a wonderful defense strategy. It's why they picked them, okay? It's why I picked my first wife and all the abuse. I didn't want to deal with me, in part because I didn't know how. I mean, we don't teach this stuff. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because guys like me in their 20s and early 30s who are suffering all of this abuse don't realize they're choosing it because they don't have the tools. I wasn't a bad person. I just didn't know. So I didn't have the skill set I have now. All right. So, but even then, as I started to get clean, I remember times where people around me would try and convince me. Even now, people try and convince me to drink and stuff like that. It's very normal. And it's usually addicts. And that's the other thing with alcohol. Almost everybody's an alcoholic. It's just socially acceptable to be an alcoholic. So that's something for all of you to consider. Most people, it's okay to be tipsy or have a couple drinks, quite often during the week and stuff like that. That's alcoholism. And so if that's something you do, I would really encourage you to get some help. And pot, same thing. Any mind-altering chemical, any of it, is not good for you. It's mind-altering. It takes you out of the present. And whether there are wonderful marketing campaigns out there for alcohol, pot, they're trying to do it with even more severe drugs, prescription pills. Let's face it, every TV commercial for medicine is trying to condition you to accept opioid addiction and pill addiction for whatever your ailment is. So we have a society that really pushes addiction. Food, my God, look at the commercials for food. Think of every commercial out there. All they're trying to do is get you addicted to something. That's it, okay? So be wary of that and look in your life. The key is look at your feelings. When you reach for that Haagen-Dazs, or for me, it's chocolate. I love chocolate. That's mine. Or if it's food, if it's a drink when you come home from work, if it's smoking a joint, a cigarette, tobacco, going shopping, whatever it is, when you go reaching for that, ask yourself this question. What am I feeling right now? Maybe you're numb. 2/3 of the population doesn't even know what their feelings are. They'll say things like, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm okay. Those aren't feelings. They don't even know. They literally don't even know what they feel. So most of you, that will be your response as you feel numb. Yes, Marianne, dark chocolate. Amen. Sorry, I had to comment on that. But before you do any of these addictive things, ask yourself, what am I feeling? If you're numb, that's a massive red flag. Get yourself with a counselor or a therapist or a coach, a qualified professional to unthaw so that you can start living your life, because you're not really present in your life if you don't know what your feelings are. And that's from severe trauma. It's a defense mechanism. So I'm not making fun of you or anything like that. My heart goes out to you. And 2/3 of the population lives that way every single day. That's heartbreaking. Now, maybe you're a type who can feel it, but what is it? Is it some sort of anxiety? Here's a great thing. Just go on Google, print and type in feelings list. Tons of them will come up. Print one, keep it with you for 3 days. Mark down before you do anything what you're feeling before you do it. In 3 days, you're going to see really quick a consistent pattern of certain feelings before you take an action. And you're going to start to discover why you like purple shirts, or as Lori, it looks like a Broncos t-shirt. You're going to discover, or dark chocolate, or whatever it is you like. So I think I'm going to end it there. But I hope that was a help to you. Please, everyone, if this show is a help to you, tell other people, share the video. I'm just trying to help people. And I think a lot of the stuff I talk about, because it goes a lot deeper than most people, I think it can help a lot of people. Please also just send me through Facebook or email topics. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to learn about? I'm happy to tackle anything that interests you. So please let me know. All right. I want to thank you all for tuning in today. Remember, as I say, when we see greatness in others, all we're ever seeing is the best version of ourselves. If you're looking for more solutions, you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel. I have hundreds, or not hundreds, but over 100 videos there. You can look for my book, Your Journey to Success. It's available on Amazon in all 3 formats, paperback and Audible and Kindle. Also, I started something called the Greatness Movement. Please Google www.thegreatnessmovement.com. I've started groups to teach these concepts that are in my book, because none of us have been taught how to walk in our greatness. So if you want to be part of a group, it's only $79 a month. You meet once a month for a little over an hour. Even if you're out of state, I do online groups. So it's a wonderful way for you to grow as a person and learn to walk in the greatness that we're all meant to. Obviously, I work with individuals and families as well. If there's something going on in your life that you'd like some more help with. Hey, Zim, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. I'm surprised you're watching the show and you're not fly fishing. I feel flattered, because that's all you ever do. So if you took your rod out of the water for a little bit, thank you. I appreciate that. Marianne, Kelly, Jan, gosh, so many people tuned in tonight. Laura, Karen, Lisa, Desma, Lisa again. I'd be here forever. I'd never get off. But everybody, thank you for tuning in. And again, let me know if there's anything else you'd like to hear me talk about. We'll see you next Sunday. Have a great week. Take care.
I can do anything. I can reach any goal today. I can do what I want. I can be what I want to be.
Coach on Fire Radio.